All right, and welcome to episode 100.
100! Sorry.
I'm really excited. Thank you so much, Jazzy, for agreeing to do this with me. I'm really excited about just talking about the journey and everything that we have been doing, everything that we are doing. So, yeah, where did we want to start?
Well, congratulations.
Thank
100
you.
episodes. Majority of podcasters fade out around episode 8, and you are celebrating 3 years of being a podcaster. And so I think we should just take it back to the beginning of why you originally wanted to start a podcast in the first place. What took you so long to get started?
It definitely was really interesting because, I was running my masterminds and we were having such great conversations in the masterminds. And I felt really lucky because I had a dad who's an entrepreneur. And so I was able to sit at a lot of tables and have conversations where I had no business really being. And so I just was like a fly in the wall.
Yeah.
And I was able to hear so much about like why they were making decisions that they were and how it was very much like from the outside, you feel like oh, everything is polished, everything is streamlined. And it's very much like, well, we're just going to figure it out. And this is an ish plan. We kind of know what we're doing.
Concepts of a plan.
So then in these masterminds, we were having these amazing conversations, and I wanted other people to be a part of these conversations and know that like entrepreneurs don't have everything figured out. And
Right.
it's very niche agnostic, the masterminds, because even though like one person is selling like business coaching and another person is selling like I'm going to help you with your resume and another person is selling dog treats, like they're all going through the journey, a really similar journey. And so I just felt like I wanted to bring these conversations to more people and say like, hey, just because you're hitting this roadblock doesn't mean that like you're less of an entrepreneur. Like all entrepreneurs hit roadblocks like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you figured a podcast would be a good way because you were launching it. Oh, I don't want to say simultaneously, but very shortly after you started your business. And so it seemed very intentional that you said, okay, I'm going to take you through my entire journey, from the start to the messy middle where, you're 3 years into business now. Do you feel like you're in the messy middle right now?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I definitely am still in the messy middle. I feel like anybody who's under like 5 years is still like a baby entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And, one of the things I tried actually starting to build this community on a platform called Mighty Networks. And it was one of those things where, in theory, it was really good, but I was like, I hated showing up to it and I was having such a hard time. Like it was kind of the chicken or the egg. Like, do I build this community and like bring people in and then build out the content, or do I build out a bunch of content and then invite people? And I just was having such a hard time with it. And I did it for almost a year and I had like a handful of people sign up for it and I hated showing up to it. So I had to say no to that platform, which felt so right when I did sign up for it. And that pivot was really hard. And I vividly remember laying in my kitchen, on my kitchen floor, like just crying, like, what am I doing if I let this go? Like, what's my next direction?
Right.
And letting that go opened up the space for me to say yes to podcasting and have the bandwidth to podcast. And so saying no to that it gave me the opportunity to meet you and start this journey.
So, all right, let's talk about that. So I was doing a workshop, business for podcasting, podcasting for business, something along those lines. You were in the audience and I believe you told me that you had been wanting to start a podcast. Did you have some equipment or something like that already or something like that? A lot of people will tell me they're like, I have this microphone. I've never opened it up.
Yes, literally the microphone was sitting in the box on my shelf for like a year because it had been something that I'd wanted to do. And just there were parts of it that I think like the editing piece of it was something that I was like, it just felt so heavy. So there was a lot of friction around it. And so I never said yes to it. So it was just sitting in a box staring at me. And I kind of talked to my dad about it. And he's like, Marshawn, this isn't if, it's when. And so, like, why not
Right.
now? Just go do it.
So I want to back up. The producer in me is like, hey, where's your introduction? So for those of you who are joining on LinkedIn and maybe you don't realize, my name is Jazzy T. I have a company called Jazzcast Pros, and I'm jumping on with Marshawn today because I'm actually the producer of her podcast, which we haven't mentioned the name of. It's called High Vibe Table Talks. And today is the 100th episode. And so, yay! Very, very exciting. So we're kind of going through the journey of why you started a podcast, what you thought it was going to be originally, what it's turning into now, and we're going to highlight some of the top episodes. And I'm saying top. Some of them are just our favorites. Some of them are the most listened to. Some of them had the most interaction on social media. So yeah, it's the top all the way around in our own opinion, I guess.
Yeah. And I doubt, like top is very subjective because I literally like leave every interview and I'm like, I can't believe I get to do this. Like I get to talk to the coolest people doing the coolest stuff. Even like Carly, who was on Instagram Live, which if you were on Instagram Live and came over here, thank you because that tech was not working. But I interviewed her last week and I just got off and I just was overwhelmed with like, I can't believe I get to have these conversations with the coolest people.
And that's what I really relate podcasting to, because it's like if you think about, high school days and, whoever was throwing a party, like they instantly became the cool kid, right? So it's like, oh, my parents are out of town. I'm going to throw a party and like everybody's going to come because like at the time, I mean, high school parties were just what they were. So you got the chance to invite people that you normally don't interact with. And it's similar with podcasting. You can have somebody, that you would love to pick their brain or let's grab coffee, and then the coffee never comes, right? But if you invite them to your house party or you invite them onto your platform, then suddenly they have 20, 30, maybe even an hour of their time to be able to give to you. And so that's one of the things, for business owners such as yourself and other people that I work with, I always say that podcasting really does open up the door to have those amazing conversations with really cool people.
Yeah.
Never comes, right? But if you invite them to your
Hey. Sorry, I was just checking to see if there were any comments on LinkedIn and opened it up.
Oh, okay. So, all right. So let's first talk about, let's talk about originally who you started this podcast for, because that's a big part when you're creating something. You want to know your, what we call a listener avatar and how that's evolved.
Yeah. Yeah. It definitely has evolved a lot. And I want to like shout out to you because like I have become a student of podcasting and you have really helped me like guide me through that process. And, when I did first start, it was kind of like, I just want people who are excited and feel, my favorite word, tear-sighted about something. They're terrified and excited. I want them to feel empowered to go for it and take action and do something. And so it was very much like, well, is this a podcast for someone who maybe wants to like move to Europe or buy a house or start a business or run a marathon? It could be for any of those people. And as we've gone through it, I've really like niched down and try to find like what is the one thing that I can help push people towards. And so I have honed in on my content. It has become a lot more sales heavy. And I really feel like I speak now to a woman entrepreneur who feels really called to start and grow a business, but feels really stuck around the sales process part of it. But if you'd asked me in June of 2023, I would have been like, my content is not sales at all. It was very much like, it's just for anybody who wants to feel inspired and go towards their dream life.
Right. And I would argue that most podcasts are for anyone who wants to be inspired. You know what I mean? It could be, even if you look at more of the entertainment type of stuff, like it's still in a way a feel good type of event. So I'm saying that to say that in podcasts, like you really do have to niche down. It's not a broadcast to reach the most mass amount of people. It's really to find your tribe and to really like hone in on something, and then also to show your expertise. And so as we were going along, you know, one of the things you always mention is if you don't sell, you don't have a business, right? If you don't sell, you don't have a business. And that's no matter what it is that your business is around, whether it's service-based or product-based, you still have to sell, you still have to tell people about it. And, you know, in this, you know, new batch of entrepreneurship that's really, you know, sprouted since the pandemic, probably a little bit before that as well, but definitely nowadays everybody's trying to find like a side hustle or another way to make some money, and not everyone has had that corporate sales training that you have had. And so I think it was a very smart move to say, okay, like I understand what it is to make 200 cold calls, you know, in a day, and be able to, you know, open up the phone book, and nowadays is open up the DMs and just like say, hi, this is who I am. And, you know, have you ever needed this type of sales? And I'm not the sales expert, this type of product, this type of service, but you could kind of phrase that a little bit better. And I know that you've put together a lot of work in your course too.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely like, and it's been cool because this podcast has allowed me to like flesh out a lot of ideas and different, you know, what connects with people, what do they resonate with? And so that has really helped me hone in on like, okay, people need to be having more conversations and putting their stuff out there. And that is really the biggest thing. And, you know, I like cringe a little bit at sales expert, because even last week when you and I were at an event together, people were like, oh, what do you do? I'm like, well, I have a podcast, and like then like didn't say anything else. And you were like, tell them about your podcast, you know? So it's like, it's not like, you know, I have experience, like you said, in the cold calling, but and I like to talk and motivate people around the sales process. But there is in some ways, I'm still learning as well, you know?
Okay, I just reshared on LinkedIn so I can bring some of my people in too.
Oh, cool.
Okay, cool. All right, so the podcast itself, the listener avatar has evolved, the content has evolved. So we've also experimented a bit as far as what the cadence is going to be. So as of right now, Marshawn, you have a podcast that comes out every Wednesday. This is a very special live episode, so it will be available on your favorite podcast player a little bit later on today. But typically it comes out 6 a.m. on Wednesday mornings. But we also experimented with Mondays and Fridays, and I'll let you kind of explain that. The idea behind it was to have more notifications for the people who are subscribed to your podcast on the RSS would get a notification on a Monday, a Wednesday, and a Friday. So talk a little bit about what those bonus episodes were about.
Yeah, they were definitely inspired by coming back from the podcast movement in Denver. And it was just like, if you can put more content out there, then try to do it. And so I just, you know, in my mastermind on Mondays, we would talk about like setting up your week, and it was very like motivational. And so we had Motivation Mondays, and I would just come out with, it was like less than a 5-minute episode around something to just get your Monday started and going.
Right.
And then in the masterminds too, on Fridays, we would celebrate wins and lessons from the week. And so I was pulling from there, and Fridays were Friday celebrations. And I really enjoyed it. You know, and the kind of the idea was like, I'm pulling wins from social media, you know, from people on social media.
Yeah.
And so hopefully then they'll go listen to the podcast, and then people who are listening to the podcast then go join social media. And it got, you know, I did it for I think 3 months, and it just got to the point where like the ROI wasn't there. It was always like, oh, I have to do those episodes, and Jazzy texting me at 9:00 at night, like, where are your episodes? I'm like, I'm reading my book, I just want to be under my covers, you know? And so as a business owner, I think you have to sit with things that are or are not working. The intention was there. The follow through was there. Like, I did it for 3 months, and it wasn't having the impact that I was hoping. And it was a drag on my energy and my bandwidth. And so at some point we just had to say, like, this isn't it. And, just we pivoted away from it.
I actually really enjoyed putting those together, especially the Friday wins, because we had all these like sound effects and it was like people
Yeah.
clapping and cheering. And I really liked putting those together. It actually lifted my spirit to put those together. So I hope the people who listened to those Friday wins, at least felt something on that day, because I definitely did. And it made me think about, what little wins did I personally have too, because you often talk about, celebrate the small wins and the big victories as well. I think a lot of people, when they go through and they'll reflecting on their year, for example, like on New Year's Eve or something, they'll think about, oh, I moved, or I got a new job, or we had a baby, or, just something like life-changing, monumental, but they didn't, celebrate the fact that they finally got their cream to sugar ratio just right at home and they no longer have to spend $8 at the coffee shop. Like that's actually a great win, because I did that too this year. I was like, yes, I got it. But that's like a small thing, but it should be celebrated. And just I don't know if I want to use the word dopamine hit, but I guess it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we actually did an episode, speaking of New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, we did an episode where you celebrated like the top Monday motivations. And so I have like 3 noted here from Coach Amelia. Coach Amelia. Where am I making myself wrong? Like that was really exciting. Like, okay, like where am I making myself wrong? And then how can you kind of like switch that around? Like, okay, well, what am I doing right? Because it is easy to negative soft talk. You also had Megan Hansel, you were created for something big. And this was in episode 27. And I feel like, again, this another positive reinforcement, like you were created for something big. And then the last one, which I want to spend some time on this, was Robbie Murphy Young says, none of it matters. Like, what's the best piece of advice you ever got? None of it matters. And so you put that in there. And at first I didn't really understand or really agree that was like a great piece of advice, but I would like to have you explain, like, what did that mean to you then? And what does it mean to you now?
Yeah. Robbie is like one of my favorite human beings. She just is so cool. And her and Amelia they were a part of my mastermind for a long, long time. But Robbie just has such a magical way about like viewing the world. And when she said that, it hit me really hard because we put so much pressure on ourselves to like make everything perfect. The next decision has to be the exact right decision. And like in the grand scheme of things, like in the big picture, none of this really matters. And so obviously, like in your day to day, there are big things, but your next step doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be forward, kind of that like fail forward mentality. And like, she was with me when I was joining the Pilates studio and I was like really hesitant. I was like, I don't know. And she was like, it doesn't have to be the perfect position. Like you can get into that and learn things and say, oh, this wasn't the right decision. And so it doesn't have to be forever. And so I think it just is, the saying kind of gives us a lot of grace to just move and just not have to be perfect at whatever we're currently doing.
And so you mentioned Robbie being one of your favorite people. She actually was your first episode, your first and second episode. Like it was so good, it went to 2 episodes. So before we dive into the content of her conversation and one of our big takeaways, I noticed you don't really have a lot of 2-part episodes anymore. So kind of walk the viewers and the listeners through what happened then in your first/second episode and how are you doing things different now?
Yeah. And that's another thing, like a journey that you and I have been on together, as far as like, I was very much like, oh, I'm having these wonderful conversations in the mastermind. They're not really all that guided. And that's what I want to bring to the table. But like for the I don't want to say random, but like for someone who doesn't really know Robbie or it's kind of like, what are you going to talk about? Like if I bring on Mel Robbins, they're going to be like, I want to listen to Mel Robbins, but if I'm
because they already know her and even she has a topic base or whatever, you're going to be inspired and
Yeah. And so it was very much like, oh, I'm just going to sit and have a conversation with Robbie because they're always like so incredible. And we talked for an hour. And so we cut it into 2 episodes because we wanted, me as a listener, I like to cap out a podcast around 30 minutes. And so that was kind of what I wanted the listener to experience as well. But it was, I don't want to say our conversation was all over the place, but like it didn't have an overarching topic. And so, in working with you, I realized that out of respect for the listener, I have to say, if you give me your 30 minutes, this is what you'll get out of it.
Yes.
And so that was like a learning point for me to say, like, hey, Robbie, when you and I sit down, this is what I want to talk about because you're such an expert at it. And I want the listener to know when they sit down and give me my 30 minutes, give me their 30 minutes, this is what they're going to learn or hear about or laugh about or understand better, any of those things. And so, I really had to dial in the questions I was asking, how I was scripting it, and what my process looked like when I was bringing on guests, and even in my solo episodes, because I kind of swung the pendulum the other way. As far as then I would get to the point where I was like, I would have this idea and I would type it all out. And so I would pretty much like script my episodes and then read it. And that was like I remember you coming on to one of our meetings being like, I watched you read that whole thing. And I was like, oh, there goes that. So go back the other way. And just find that happy medium, because I have been on a podcast where someone, like, they had 5 questions and that's what they were going to ask me. And they didn't deviate from that at all. And I was like, I remember leaving that just being like, well, that's a lesson in how I don't want to interview people. And I have honed in on my interviewing skills, and it's something that people compliment me on when they are being interviewed. They're like, oh, you ask some really good questions. And
yes, you do.
I like watching Hot Ones with, I forget his name, Sean something.
Yeah, I don't know the last name, but man, that show just keeps coming up in my universe. They were even on UXXI. They had them on there because they were featuring a hot sauce from Rochester.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah, I know. It just keeps coming. I have to watch it, but I haven't seen it yet. But I love the idea of it is, the hot sauce gets hotter and the questions get harder.
Yeah, but people who are on there, they're big celebrities and are interviewed all the time, are like, I've never been asked that question, or like, how did you find out that information, or like, they're just always like blown away by these questions that he asks. And so we watch it for entertainment, but me as a, now interviewing people, I look at that as how can I hone my craft and be more like him.
Yeah. So sticking with Robbie for a second. So she is a musician. Like, she writes songs, has put out an actual album, but she talks about a time where she didn't consider herself creative. Mm-hmm. And so from there, I guess you can talk about that just a little bit. And then I feel like that really launched one of your lightning round questions. So just talk about that a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that a lot of people go through this process as far as like, if you don't fall under the typical guise of like, I paint or I write music or all these standard definitions of creativity, then I'm not a creative. And I struggle with that for a long time as well. Even like writing, like, I'm not a writer, yet I'm putting out a lot of content every week using writing, Mm-hmm. And so as entrepreneurs, like, I don't know the exact definition of entrepreneurship, but in my head, you're building something out of nothing. Like, where there was no business, now there is. And so you are creative, you are creating something. And so I love that. I love peering into people's brains about what creativity is, because I want it to be so much bigger than I paint, I color, I draw, I sing.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I brought something into the world that was vulnerable and could feel scary, but, made my inner child smile ear to ear,
So today on May 14th, 2025, what does creativity mean to you?
Ooh, I think, that just kind of popped into my head, but I think it's something that makes your inner child smile ear to ear, like something that isn't bogged down by all of the shoulds of society and is just letting ourselves play and have fun and not care what the outcome is,
Mm.
doing it messy and vulnerably and enjoyably.
And I don't remember exactly what I said when you interviewed me a few months back, but you asked me the same question. And I still feel, for me, creativity is kind of like when I get in the zone and when I'm,
Mm,
I guess you would call channeling information, whether it's God and source and spirit or higher self, whatever it
mm-hmm,
is. That's where I feel like the creativity flows. I just know what to do even though I might not know how to do it. And like, as a
mm,
person who's been a broadcaster, and especially like when I go out on stage, fun fact, I don't like hosting stuff. I really don't. So I, as like the person who's sitting here, I don't host anything, but my creativity, my higher self, my spirit guides, they're the ones that are hosting stuff. They're the ones that know what to say. They're the ones that know, how to get the reaction, whether it's a laugh or, like a empathetic moment or whatever it is that I'm trying to solicit from the audience at that particular time. That's when I let that creativity flow, okay, the spirit flow, and my ego moves out of the way, and my imposter
mm-hmm,
syndrome moves out of the way, and all of that. And I
mm-hmm,
just like let that information go. And that also comes into when I'm editing or when I'm creating stuff too. I don't write often. I only write when the spirit moves me to, or the flow, and that's usually like a poem or something like that. And I'll just go. You know what I mean? I
mm-hmm.
don't think about, okay, I'm gonna do this stanza and whatever. Like, I just start writing, and then I'm like, oh wow, that's a whole poem that I just did. But it
Yeah.
wasn't really me. Again, it was like the creative spirit that flows through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it's
because
funny
that
how you can, it's so many different interpretations.
Yeah. And I think that the ego and the imposter syndrome and all those things, again, that's society telling us this is how you should do and this is how you should act. And just breaking free from those is how we are our highest self.
Absolutely. All right, so let's talk about, we talked about Robbie. That was your first guest.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Let's go to I don't know. I guess you can pick one. I don't know if you want to go in the order that I wrote out for you, or if you want to let the
Yeah.
creativity take you away.
I really like, as we were talking, because I was going through, and it was hard to pick episodes we were going to talk about because, again, like each of them were so, you could pull out so much from them. But one that really was monumental for me was my conversation with Diane, who's an ADHD ish she's a coach for ADHD-ish entrepreneurs. And that was something that I was going through the diagnosis at the time and the roller coaster of emotions that was that. So, part of why she's an ADHD-ish coach is because it is really hard to get diagnosed as an adult. One of my first so I went to my Okay. So, as a lot of people do, I was on like TikTok and social media being like, huh, that resonates. I do that. Oh, just
Yeah.
kind of connecting some dots. And so my husband got
Self-diagnosis.
home. Yeah. And my husband got home and I just like started hysterically crying. And he's like, what is the matter? And I was like, I think I have ADHD. And he's like, uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, probably. Like, I'm not surprised. And so I went to my doctor and he gave me a list of people to call to get like a go through an exam. And one guy that I called, first of all, he talked at me for like 15 minutes. And then I told him how old he was. And he's like, that's really old to get diagnosed. And I was like, F you, dude.
First of
Like,
all, I am not very old.
I know. And like, it just was so like demeaning of like where we
Yeah.
are in society and
Yeah.
whatever. And so it's really hard to get diagnosed. It's very expensive. If you want to go through like the whole formal process, it's thousands of dollars. And like if all you need is just someone saying like your brain isn't broken, you're not bad at adulting, like how can we work with your brain? Then
Mm-hmm.
like that, $2,000 diagnosis is just kind of, let's just give that to ourselves, you know?
Right. Right.
And so having that conversation with her was very much full of like grace and understanding and how do we work with our brains and not against them, and a release of shame that has been built up, because I always felt like, how come everyone else can do this and I can't, you know?
Hmm.
And so it just was a really wonderful conversation and just felt like a hug through a process that is not easy to go through, you know?
And so, for anyone watching or listening to this right now, that was back in June. So, that was like your second year anniversary, episode 50 with Diane, ADHD ish, adults, myths, realities, and next steps. And you can definitely check that out if you're, feeling like, okay, that's something that I need in my life. I definitely encourage you to check that out. So, Mershawn, how did you even find Diane? Because she's currently, in the Oregon/California, somewhere over there in the Pacific Northwest area, and not in our regular circle here. So how did you even connect with her?
Yeah, we met on LinkedIn. I was just perusing different entrepreneurs and things like that on LinkedIn. I like to do that on LinkedIn. Threads is where I found a lot of guests, but I found her specifically on LinkedIn, and sent her an email, and she emailed me back and was like, "Oh, I think it sounds like a conversation with me would be good for you as well as your listeners." So that's where I found
So
her.
did you go in to pitch her to be a guest, or did you just want to connect with her in general?
Initially, I just wanted to connect with her and talk about how her content was really resonating with me, as someone who's going through that process.
So it was a genuine DM. That's something that we talk about a lot sometimes too, as far as like, when you're trying to pitch, even with sales and things like that, like sometimes you just have to be friendly first instead of just like going straight in. I actually just had a LinkedIn request, and I'm not going to read it word for word, but I just read it this morning. And it was just like, I found your profile and found it interesting. Okay, well, what was interesting about it? And I'm hoping that, we can work together and refer business to each other and, be best friends and go on a trip together. And I'm just like, I don't know you, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And I don't really see myself really responding to that because it was like too many asks, like
Yeah.
right out of the gate.
Yeah.
So, we're talking about like how you're finding some of your guests. Robbie, obviously somebody who was in your mastermind and in your world. Diane is somebody that you just found on LinkedIn and generally wanted to connect with. You mentioned on Threads that, sometimes you'll find people there that you resonate with their content or they resonate with your content and you kind of just connect that way. And now, 3 years in, 100 episodes, you're actually having agencies reach out to you and say, hey, I have a great guest. So number one, how does that just feel to know that people are paying other people to reach out to you?
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. And I get a bunch now. I probably get a handful a week, which is,
Mm.
it's interesting, especially from someone who also pitches to be on other people's podcasts.
So I guess what I'm trying to get at is like some of those I can tell is like a little bit of annoying,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, yeah.
you have found like a couple of really great guests, which we'll get to Will in a second.
Yeah.
But what makes the difference when you're reading those pictures as a podcast host?
Coming from someone who does pitch and does sell, I always enjoy humor. Like there was one, I wish I should have looked it up because she made me laugh at like, it was the first thing, which is a horrible habit, but I like opened my phone first thing in the morning and read it and was like, this is hilarious. Like it just made me chuckle and I had to respond back to it. There have been
Nice.
a couple like that where one guy was like, and if none of this makes sense, you can respond with screw you, dude, or like something like that. And it's like, again, nothing really matters. Like, it's not that serious. And so laughter, I think, is always good, as well as like, you've really like taken time to understand a little bit about my content and who I serve and
Mhm.
something that is different and unique. And you're talking, you mentioned Will, and like his was an agency that reached out to me and he had like 3 bullet points of topics he thought would be interesting for my audience, and one just really was like, wow, that is cool, I would really like to talk more on that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so Will came on, another ADHD entrepreneur, and he talked about cloning solopreneurs because,
Hmm.
as you know, as entrepreneurs, we're wearing all the hats, especially as solopreneurs. And his episode really blew up on TikTok. Like, this is just a series of videos that we put on the Jazzcast Pros Network TikTok account, and people were really resonating, especially with some of the automation tools
Hmm.
that I had never heard of before. And again, he's coming from the West Coast, I believe. And so he was able
Yeah.
to, able to just talk about things like Perplexity and Airtable. Did you find yourself using any of that stuff or trying it?
Yeah, actually, I used Perplexity quite a bit when I was building my course. I would go bounce back and forth between ChatGPT and Perplexity, and Perplexity was really good at helping me create my workbook. I would kind of like word dump a bunch of stuff in there and say, here's the topic, here's all my content. Can you help me create this in workbook PDF format? And it was really good at making it concise and interesting based on what we were talking about. So, and that's something
Cool.
that was, I think he was a really good episode of like, here's tangible things you can do today.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like Diane was much more like mindset and big picture and affirmations for yourself when you're like shame spiraling, and I think both of those are really needed, both as women, as entrepreneurs, in sales. Like, mindset is the first piece of my sales prospecting course, because if you don't have your mind right, the other
Yeah.
stuff doesn't really matter, and
Yeah.
but then part two is, okay, now how are we actually going to take action? And so Will's episode was really good about, here's tangible things that you can execute today as soon as you know are done listening to this episode.
Yeah. And that's totally my jam. It's like, just give me the the bullet
Yeah.
points, give me the things I need to do so I can go off and do it. So that's episode 79 with Will Christensen. Let's see. So I know we are running up on our time really quickly too.
Yeah.
So this was very interesting to me. So here we are, 100 episodes, 3 years in, and I just found out that you have a personal Instagram. And I thought we were friends. But the way I found out was so funny. And so I just want you to kind of like share the story of how the day that your personal life and your podcast life literally collided with your episode of with Coach.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really funny because I like want everybody to listen to my stuff, and I'm always like, how many listens did I have of the episode? But then as soon as people in my real life are like, I heard you on the podcast, or I was just watching your Instagram story, I'm like, oh my God, instant like red face, and like I can't. But I coach my daughter's lacrosse team. And so the other coaches and we send back and forth different reels and things on Instagram, and we kept sending back and forth. Sayers, he puts a lot of content out for lacrosse coaches, and so we were sending it back and forth. And so I was bouncing back and forth between my two Instagrams and shared something about the podcast on my personal one, and it was very much a like, you got to do it messy, and I put it on my personal one, and then was instantly like, oh my God, why did I do that? Everyone's gonna see it. And then I was just like, no, like, that was exactly what you were supposed to do. This is doing it messy. This is putting yourself out there. This is having more conversations with people about what you have to offer. And just because they follow you in your real life, like, they could benefit or know someone who could benefit from what you're sharing on the business side.
Yeah. And normally when people are launching, like, their inner circle are the first people that we want to share stuff with. So I was surprised to hear that you kind of were keeping them separate on purpose. But then I also, had a meeting with one of my other clients that say my best friends have never listened to an episode. She's like 24 episodes in. And so it is kind of that thing too, where it's like you want everybody to listen to it, but sometimes, you're going to get the most engagement with people that are so far outside of your inner circle as well. So it's kind of like a fine line dance.
Well, I think it's part of it is because there are people, like sometimes when you share business ideas or goals or dreams, people can like, what about you a lot? Like, what about if this happens? Or what
Mm.
if you fail? Or what are you going to do when they say no? Or is that really a good idea? And so
So
you
like
do.
they reality check you.
Yeah, and a lot of it does come from a place of love because they don't want to see you fail.
Right.
Some of it is a projection of like, well, if you go after your dreams and succeed, that means that my
Mm.
lack of success is just a lack of me trying.
Yes.
And some people just don't have, they're very risk adverse. And so their initial reaction is like, I'm going to project out to you all the things that could go wrong. And so there
Wow.
are times in your life where you have to be protective of your goals and dreams because they're just like these little baby butterflies that are in your hand, and if people come and dream crush them, like it's hard, and it can take, your confidence can take a hit.
Yeah. I'm just being called to ask you this right now. What is a must read book?
Ooh.
Like right now for you? Because you read a lot of books. But what would you say, like, anybody who's listening to this right now, you're like, yeah, you have to read this?
So it's, I'm going to answer it in a way that is going to sound weird because I haven't actually finished it, but it's
Okay.
been just like the microphone. It's been staring at me on my bookshelf for so long and I keep starting and stopping it. But it has come up on my TikTok a couple times now too, where it's like the universe is like, read this, finish
Well,
this.
that's probably why the universe just told me to bring it up again.
Yeah. Um, and it's The Artist's Way.
Mm,
And it's
yeah.
12 weeks, and you do morning pages and journal every morning, and then do journal prompts every week. And so people who have done it just talk about how that really opened the doors for them creatively, vulnerability wise, like just the morning pages really shed all the junk that we have going
Mm,
on in our brain, and all the things that prohibit us from living the way that the universe wants us to live.
awesome. All right. Well, I'm going to check that out too. I've definitely heard of that a few times,
Mm-hmm.
but just need to kind of get into it. Let's see. So the last episode, and I'm throwing this one in here because it's definitely something that I've been thinking about a lot as well, even though I don't have a product based business. But you had somebody from London come on named
Mm-hmm.
Elizabeth, and episode 77, Ditch the Discounts, how to sell high ticket items. And she brought up the idea of like, if you're getting like a luxury bag, or whether it's sunglasses or luggage, I mean, these are just, I guess, the first things that are coming to mind. Those items don't typically go on sale. Even certain name brand sneakers like will rarely go on sale if you think about it. But there may be a free gift. Even like Sephora might have a free
Mm-hmm.
gift, right? I don't really shop at Sephora a lot, so correct me if I'm wrong. Do they have a lot of sales there at Sephora?
That's a great question. I don't know
Yeah, but
either, but every time I have shopped there, they give you a little goodie bag at the end
that's
of
what I'm
like, look
saying.
at all the
Yes.
stuff I got, and like it makes
Yes.
you feel better about spending that kind of money.
Exactly. And that's what she brought up. So if you're selling a high ticket item, you don't necessarily have to discount that particular thing. But the way to bring people in and get that like salesy feel, I mean, not salesy, but like, this is exciting. I need to take action now. And I'll see the inserts all the time in the mail where it's like, oh, buy, $50 worth of makeup or whatever and get a free bag.
Mm-hmm.
And that just like clicked something from me. I was like, that's right. They don't discount, because we always talk about, if you want to raise your prices, or things like that, or how to bring more business in without, devaluing yourself. Right. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
you could have like a high ticket for your product or your service, but then also throw something in. Like
Mm-hmm.
I throw in for my podcast in a box clients, I throw in weekly coaching, which
Mm-hmm.
I could very well charge $100 or more every week to sit with you for an hour and go through all the woes or the successes or whatever it is about your podcast. But I throw that in because I want, you to feel supported at the end of the day. And if you're feeling supported, then most likely you're going to stick with the podcast. I think it is working pretty well, because now we
Mm-hmm.
have, pretty soon we'll have 3 shows that are reaching 100 episodes. So shout out
Wow.
to Healthy Illness, who is about 130, I think, as of right now. Marshawn is at 100 episodes as of today. Beauty Boss Millionaire is over 100 episodes, and pretty soon the Doze is like 25 episodes shy of reaching 100. And so that's something that I decided to throw in because, you know, an editor can literally just take your stuff, edit it, send it back to you, and never talk to you. And I know editors that do that as well. And so I think it makes a big difference to have like these weekly check-ins. So with, like I said, Elizabeth coming in from London and talking about this luxpreneur, just talk to me about like how you found her and what that conversation meant for you.
Yeah, I think she was on Threads. I think I found her on Threads because Threads feels like a big hug to me as far as a social media platform, and I've really connected with a lot of really cool people on there. I probably have 6 or 7 podcast guests already that I've met on Threads. And so her idea just was really, really cool because pricing is something a lot of entrepreneurs really struggle with. Like, how do I price it? How do I value my time? You know, and there's a big stage initially where you're trading time for money. And then you kind of like level up and you're like, okay, how can I make this evergreen? And so just really understanding, you know, she just gives you a different mindset because there are people who buy used Hondas and there are people who buy Lamborghinis. So there is a price point for everybody. But what is going to make you feel good at the end of the day when you charge someone for something? How are you going to leave that interaction being like, I was valued, my time was valued, they got something that they love out of our transaction, and not devaluing, like you said, any of it.
So that episode was 77. We put that out Thanksgiving weekend just to kind of coincide with, you know, the whole Black Friday sales and that whole idea there. So you could definitely check that out. Marshawn, I guess my last question, and then if you want to give some final thoughts, what is your vision for the next 100 episodes?
We have some cool stuff cooking. I think we talked Monday about like future plans. You know, we talked about how the mini episodes didn't really take off in the way that we wanted it to, but we have some ideas for like mini content going forward and just really honing in more on the sales content. You know, I have my course, Sales Prospecting Simplified, which focuses and spotlights the prospecting piece of the sales process, but that is just one small piece of the sales funnel. And so as people get more comfortable with having more conversations, now how do you tailor those conversations to guide them to a yes to your service, whatever you have to offer? And yeah, I think really working on my interview styles and getting some really cool guests on there, bigger audiences, and yeah, that's kind of, I think, where we're going.
And I will tease, we have a live event cooking.
Oh yeah. Yep.
So it's going to be here in Rochester, New York. And we're looking at International Podcast Weekend, which is in late September. And Sean will be there having a live episode. I'll be there hosting live for Elevating Enterprise, which is my podcast. And I'm on episode 6. I co-host with my husband, who is also the brainchild of this particular concept, really trying to elevate SME, small and medium enterprises, what makes us different from like big corporations and how do we scale up. And so we'll be talking there. We have some amazing partnerships which will be revealed. Yeah, so just stay tuned. Make sure you are following and liking and just being involved so that you'll make sure that you actually right here on LinkedIn, I do have a newsletter. I just want to give it a shout out. It's called I Heard It on a Podcast. And so you'll be able to see some of the highlights from past episodes and also just be on the lookout of what else is happening.
Yeah, which is such a cool title because I say that all the time. Like, I'm always like, so I was listening to this podcast and heard da 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 da, you know?
Yep.
And even when we were at the event last week, someone was like, yeah, you like are a student of podcasting. So I was just talking about the different things that I heard on different podcasts.
Right. Okay, well, close us out, Marshawn.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for like doing this, putting this together and guiding everything. Thank you for being my biggest cheerleader as a podcaster and my guide. I think that I've learned so much about the process, about business, and I would not be where I am today in my podcast if it weren't for you, Jazzy. So thank
Oh,
you.
well, thank you. I mean, you're definitely one of my favorite students, and I enjoy going through this process with you. And cheers to 100 more.
Cheers to 100 more. As I always like to end, big dreams and small steps will transform your life.
All right. Yay.